Noonien Singh is one of the most brilliant, capable, and terrifying characters in the Star Trek universe. And to be clear, I'm referring to the 2013 Star Trek Into Darkness Benedict Cumberbatch Khan, at least for this week's rundown on teams, leadership, and culture. He's genetically engineered to be superior in every measurable way. Strength, intelligence, strategic thinking, leadership presence. When he walks into a room, people feel it. When he speaks, people listen. When he asks something of you, you don't want to say no. And the crew he assembled in Star Trek Into Darkness, they didn't just follow him, they would die for him. And some of them did. That's not a leadership success story, that's a warning label. Because here's what nobody talks about when they talk about Khan. The most dangerous leaders in history weren't the ones nobody followed. They were the ones everybody followed, without question, without condition, without anything left to be loyal to if the leader was wrong. And Khan was wrong. Catastrophically, completely, irreversibly wrong. And every single person who followed him paid for it. Before I take Khan apart, I have to give you something. Because if I don't, I'm not being fair. And if I'm not being fair, the lesson doesn't land. Khan was an exceptional leader by almost every observable metric. He was calm under pressure, genuinely calm, not performance calm. While everyone around him was reacting, he was thinking 3 moves ahead. He communicated with precision. He never wasted words. He gave direction without ambiguity. His team always knew exactly what he wanted and exactly what was expected of them. He also understood people. He knew what motivated them, what they feared, what they needed to hear, and when. He could read a room the way most people read a spreadsheet. Quickly, accurately, and with immediate strategic application. In another life, in another context, with a different mission, Khan would be the person you'd hire to run your most critical operation. But context is everything, and Khan's context was the problem. Not his capability, not his purpose, not his methods, not his mission, not his execution. What he was executing toward. And this is where it gets directly relevant to you, because the question isn't whether Khan could lead. He obviously could. The question is what he was leading people toward, and whether they had any independent bias for evaluating whether that destination was worth following to him. They didn't, and that's the whole lesson. Now, full disclosure, because Star Trek fans will absolutely come for me in the comments, Khan didn't actually hire his crew in any conventional sense. They were genetically engineered, as he was, for a purpose. He simply subverted them, essentially programmed their loyalty from the inside out. Kind of like a cult, but with better bone density. That's a whole nother video. For today, we're talking about the crew as they were before they became popsicles, and the culture, or lack of it, that Khan likely built around them. I use a framework called the Four Cornerstones of Culture: vision, mission, values, and the human element. It's the diagnostics I run on every organization I work with to determine whether what they've built is a culture or a costume. Let's run Khan's operation through it. Vision is not a goal. Vision is not a target. Vision is the answer to the question, if we succeed at our mission, what would the world look like? It's the painted picture, it's the compelling story that makes people want to get on the ship and stay on it when the weather gets bad. Khan had a vision. It was clear, it was vivid, and it was completely personal to him. Revenge against those who betrayed his people. The protection of his crew at any cost. The assertion of his superiority over a world that had tried to contain and control him. The problem with that vision is that it only makes sense if you're Khan. It was never translated into something the crew could own independently. It was never articulated as a shared destination. It was articulated as Khan's destination, and the crew was invited to come along. That's not a North Star. That's a hostage negotiation with better cinematography. A real vision survives the leader's absence. It can be held by other people. It can be communicated without the leader in the room. Khan's vision required Khan to explain it, justify it, and sustain it every single day. Remove Khan, and the crew had nothing pointing the way. They were loyal to a person, not to a destination. Mission is the 20-mile march. It's what your organization does the same way, every day, that moves it toward the vision. Consistent, non-negotiable, doesn't require a pep talk to activate. Naturally, Khan's crew had tasks. They had assignments. They executed with precision. But their mission, the daily march, was likely entirely dependent on whatever Khan decided it was that day. It would shift with his emotional state, his strategic positioning, his shifting calculations about whatever nefarious plans he was working on. There was no documented standard, no shared protocol that ran independently of Khan's judgment. When Khan's plan changed, and it changed constantly, the crew adapted without question, because their job wasn't to execute a mission. It was to execute Khan, what he decided, whenever he decided it, for whatever reason he gave them, or didn't. That's not a mission, that's a dependency. And in a business, dependency on one person's daily judgment, rather than a documented, deployed standard, is the thing that keeps you reactive. Level 2 on the Business Maturity Index every time. High effort, inconsistent output, performance that lives or dies with whoever's in the room that day, that is, of course, if they weren't frozen. Values are the non-negotiables. They are the standards against which every decision, every behavior, and every personal choice is measured. They determine who gets on the ship, who stays on it, and who gets pushed ashore. And the test of your values isn't what you write on the wall. It's what you do when following them costs you something. Khan had values. He valued intelligence. He valued strength. He valued the protection of his people above everything else. They weren't pretend values. He demonstrated them consistently and under enormous pressure. But Khan's values were only Khan's values. They were never institutionalized. They were never made explicit, never agreed to by the crew, never enforced as a standard that applied to everyone, including Khan himself. They were observed, not shared, modeled, not embedded. The standard is not what you preach, it's what you permit. We know Khan permitted deception, manipulation, and calculated sacrifice of individuals when it served the mission. Not reluctantly, deliberately. And because the crew had no independent value framework to evaluate those decisions against, they didn't push back. They couldn't. They had no captain's code of their own. They had Khan's code, which meant whatever Khan decided was right, because Khan decided it. That's not a value-driven culture. That is a personality-driven operation. And personality-driven operations are only as ethical, only as sustainable, and only as trustworthy as the personality driving them. The human element is the most valuable intangible asset in any organization. Not because people are resources to be deployed, but because the right people bring something no system, no process, and no single leader can manufacture on their own. Unique personalities, distinct skills, perspectives shared by different experiences, different instincts, different ways of seeing the same problem. The human element is what gives an organization the ability to think in more than one direction at once, to stress test an idea before it comes a decision, to catch what leaders missed because they were standing too close to it. The right crew doesn't just execute the plan. They interrogate it, they improve it, they push back when it's wrong, and they pull harder when it's right. That diversity of thought, that breadth of perspective, is the difference between an organization that compounds in capability over time and one that is only ever as good as whatever its leader happened to think this morning. Khan's crew were, by any measure, exceptional people, capable, disciplined, deeply committed, but they were selected for one quality above all others: loyalty to Khan. Not to a mission, not to a set of values. To him, personally, unconditionally, and completely. And that single selection criteria collapsed everything the human element is supposed to provide. There was no broad consensus, no competing perspectives, no one in the crew who brought a different frame and the standing to argue for it. One man's plan, one man's logic, one narrow line of thought, executed with terrifying precision by people who had surrendered their independent judgment as the price of admission. When Khan's thinking was sound, the operation was formidable. When his thinking drifted into obsession, and it did, there was no one left to notice. Not because they weren't capable of noticing, because noticing wasn't their job, following was, which, in all fairness, is a lot easier to do when you're in cryosleep. The human element question isn't, are these good people? Khan's crew were good people. The question is, what are they good for, independent of the leader who assembled them? If the answer is nothing, they just follow, you don't have a crew. You have an echo chamber with combat training. And echo chambers don't tell you when you've gone too far. They just confirm that you haven't gone far enough, if they weren't frozen. Here's what I want you to walk away with, and I want to be precise about it because this is the part that usually gets misread. The lesson is not that loyalty is bad. Loyalty is one of the most powerful forces in an organization. The lesson is that loyalty to a person, loyalty that isn't anchored to anything beyond the person themselves, is structurally fragile. It collapses the moment the person is wrong, and every person, no matter how brilliant, is wrong sometimes. Kirk's crew was also loyal, profoundly loyal, but Kirk's crew would argue with him. McCoy would push back constantly. Spock offered the dissenting logic every time emotion was driving the decision. Scotty drew lines he wouldn't cross. That crew was loyal to Kirk and to something beyond Kirk, to Starfleet's values, to the mission, to each other as independent people with independent judgment. That's the difference. That's the whole difference. Khan's crew would have been loyal to Khan and nothing else. The moment Khan's judgment failed, and it did fail, spectacularly, there would be nothing left to hold the operation together. No compass, no captain's code, no shared vision that could survive the leader's descent into obsession. assuming his crew wasn't frozen. In your business, the question isn't whether your team is loyal to you. I hope they are. The question is whether they're also loyal to something that will still be pointing the right direction if you're having the worst year of your life. A vision they believe in. Values they defend even if you weren't watching. A mission they execute because it's right, not just because you asked them to. If the only thing holding your culture together is how much your team likes working for you, you've built a personality, not an organization. And personalities are mortal. 3 things, concrete, start this week. 1. Articulate the vision beyond yourself. If your vision statement is a variation of be the best, insert name of product or service, in the region, or deliver exceptional service, that is not a vision. That's a goal with good intention attached. A vision is the answer to, if we succeed, what does the world look like for our clients, our team, our community? Paint the enticing picture, tell the compelling story. Then write it down and put it somewhere everyone can see it, including on the days you're not in the building. Hell, get tattoos if you like. Write it on each other's foreheads. 2. Make the values explicit and enforce them. Your values are not the words on your website. Your values are what you do when following them costs you a client, a revenue line, or a conversation you didn't want to have. Write them down, share them with your team, and then, this is the part most leaders skip, enforce them. Publicly, consistently, including on yourself. The standard is not what you preach, it's what you permit. The moment you permit a value violation because the person violating them is too valuable to confront, you've told the entire team that the values are optional for people who matter enough. 3. Hire for alignment, not just loyalty. Khan selected for loyalty. He got people who would follow him anywhere, including off the cliff. The alternative isn't selecting people who won't be loyal. The alternative is selecting people who are loyal to the same things you are. To the vision, to the values, to the mission, so that their loyalty has an independent anchor. You want people who would tell you when you're wrong, not because they're insubordinate, but because they care about the same destination you do, and they can see when the heading is off. That's the crew worth building. Not the one that follows you, the one that follows the right direction and calls you back to it when you drift. Khan was one of the most compelling leaders ever put on screen. Brilliant, capable, magnetic. His crew followed him with a devotion that most leaders would envy. And it wasn't enough, because devotion without direction is just momentum aimed at whatever the leader wants that moment. And in Khan's case, what he wanted became increasingly disconnected from anything defensible, and there was no one in the crew with the standing, the framework, or the independent purpose to say so, even if they weren't frozen. The most dangerous moment in any organization isn't when the leader fails. It's when the leader fails and nobody around them has anything to hold on to except the leader. Build the vision, define the values, hire for alignment, give your team something that points true north even when you can't. Because someday, guaranteed, you're going to be wrong about something important. The question is whether you've built an organization that can tell you so. The Four Cornerstones of Culture assessment is in the description. If you want to know whether you've built a culture or a personality, that's where you start.